Hello, freshmen, and welcome to one of the many parts of Brush's orientation. Today I'm going to be giving you tips on how to pass your classes in the easiest ways. So first, you want to become familiar with mnemonic devices, which is any learning technique that aids information retention or retrieval in the human memory. There are different ones. So one method is the method of LOCI. If you need to remember vocabulary words for a class, this method can be useful. So you picture a familiar location in your head, so most likely your room or some room in your house. You mentally place the words that need to be remembered in different places or on top of the different items in your room. You then go back through your mental journey of placing these words in your room when you have to retrieve it and it's easier to recall. So, here's an example. Here's some vocab words from Spanish. We have verde on top of the lamp, rojo on top of the bed, azul on top of the chair, and blanco on top of the TV. So I might picture these words in these specific places in my room, which this is not my room, this is just an example. And then when it's time to recall it, I go back through in my room and mentally imagine these words again. There's also something known as the peg wording method. You link words with numbers, which often rhyme. So this is the universal little technique here. So 1 is a bun, 2 is a shoe, 3 is a tree, 4 is a door, 5 is a hive, 6 is a pile of sticks, 7 is heaven, 8 is gate, 9 is the line, 10 is a hen. Just remember that right there, like it is. Then you picture the item you need to remember. So it was something like this. 1 is a bun, dog. So you're going to remember a dog and a bun. So here we go. We have our dog eating a cheeseburger. And then you're going to remember, oh, that's number 1 on my list because 1 is a bun. We also have the chunking method, which is the process of dividing large pieces of information into smaller units that are easier to remember and then grouping them together in the end. So it works great when you're studying essay questions for exams. One personal example is me and my anatomy class. I had to study the 5 classes of antibodies. So while studying, I studied each one individually and then on the exam wrote them all out as a whole. But when I was studying, it made it easier to study them in chunks. So chunk 1 was 1. Chunk 2 was the second antibody. Chunk 3 was the third antibody. Chunk 4 was the fourth one. And chunk 5 was the fifth one. And then I went through and on the exam, thought of them in the chunks and wrote them out as a whole. So it was much easier to study than trying to remember all of that at one time. We also have rehearsal. There are 2 types of rehearsal. Rehearsal is something you might be familiar with. It's basically repeating information over and over again in order to memorize it. So there's 2 types. It can be good and bad because it is associated with cramming, and it takes less effort, so it is often used. So maintenance rehearsal is one type of rehearsal. This is the process of repeatedly verbalizing or thinking about a piece of information. It does work, but are you really learning and understanding the material? This is the reason I get C's on exams. Because I sit here and read my notes over and over and over and over again. It doesn't really matter if I understand the material. I'm just trying to memorize the information. And it only lasts for a short period of time. So I sit here and say hypertrophy, enlargement of cells, entire organ. Hypertrophy, enlargement of cells of an entire organ. So I say that over and over and over again. I memorize it. I feel like I know it for that time being. I go on to memorize something else, and I forget it. It's strictly just repeating the information. Whereas elaborative rehearsal is something that is more ideal. So it's a memory technique that involves thinking about the meaning of a term to be remembered, as opposed to simply repeating the word to yourself over and over. So, hypertrophy and my granddad, which also refers to the self-reference effect. So if you think of something that is relevant to your life and relate it to what you're learning, you're more likely to remember it. So in this case, hypertrophy. I found out that that was one of the problems with my granddad's heart and why he takes approximately 15 medications a day for his heart. Not just his heart, but he takes a lot of medications for his heart. And one of the reasons why was because of the hypertrophy. So You can see here that the normal heart, it does not have enlarged muscle, but in the hypertrophic heart, the muscle is enlarged, which is bad. Um, so with elaborative rehearsal, I put this image with it. So you can put image, you can apply life meaning, you can, um, what else? Associate it with other things. So like, um, when, um, eh, so you know those little things that you get and you put them in water and they grow bigger? You can think of it like that. So like, that makes it easier to remember. Um, There's also something known as the relearning method. This is helpful when you're studying for cumulative finals. So, you learn a new idea at the beginning of the semester, you go on about the semester, learn more material over and over and over, then you have your final exam. Well, when you're studying for this exam, you most likely go back and relearn this material. Once you are learning it twice, then you learn the material faster and you remember it easier. I can vouch for this because at the beginning of my anatomy 1 semester, I had to study the epithelial tissues. I had to know all these, how to draw them out, the different characteristics of each. So when I was first studying for these, I drew them over and over and over again. And it took me a total of like 3 to 4 hours to remember them. Their different qualifications, um, functions, etc. And then when I studied these and drew them over again and studied them the same way by method of flashcards, drawing them out at the end of the semester for the final exam, it only took me about half the time. And I still remember them. So I learned it even better and faster. So there's also something known as deep processing versus shallow processing. So how deep you process it affects how well you memorize it. So deep processing has been proven to be better than shallow processing. How much time and effort are you putting into what you're trying to study and remember? So are you looking over it for 5 minutes or are you looking over it for 30 minutes a day? So for shallow processing, it is also related with how it looks or how it sounds. So that's something like maintenance rehearsal. It's associated with that. Whereas deep processing, you apply meanings with images, associations, putting things in your own words, etc. So that's more with elaborative rehearsal than maintenance rehearsal. Sometimes this might be the reason why I get C's on exams as well, because I spend, instead of a week studying for anatomy sometimes, like I know I should, I'll study the night before, which is not very good, which is why I get C's on the exams. So there's also something known as organization of ideas. So Bauer et al. Found that subjects remembered more words when a hierarchy was used to meaningfully organize words. So, for example, we have the nervous system here. It's broken down into the CNS, PNS. The PNS is broken down into somatic nervous system, the automatic nervous system, and then the automatic nervous system is broken down in the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So when I think of it this way, it's much more easier to remember. Clustering also involves organizing information in memory related to groups. So you have a list of Spanish vocab words. If you base them in groups like numbers, colors, greetings, goodbyes, foods, it makes it easier to remember and recall them in groups. There's also something known as technical versus content accuracy. Most professors prefer that you understand the meaning behind certain ideas, which is content accuracy, but others prefer that you have both. So, technical is like, it has to be exact. Like, everything has to be exact. Which, with Dr. Squires and Dr. Gerard on their exams that are essays, yes, that's how it is. Like, sometimes I don't even study the meaning or the content. I'm just trying to study all the material so that I can write it all out and have it all exact. And it's literally word from your notes. So you have to get to know what your professors want on their exams. But you'll learn that after you have an exam or two with each professor. There's also something known as metacognition and their strategies. So it is the thinking about thinking. You understand the best way that you learn. Are you a visual learner or are you auditory learning? It is your knowledge of your thinking. If you know something is going to take you a long time to learn, you plan for that amount of study time. So, like, I know that it's probably going to take me a week to study for anatomy. So, sometimes I count for that, sometimes I don't, and I'm going to keep that on the low. But, so you plan for that. Whereas for my psych classes, it only takes me 2 to 3 days to study. Another strategy might be getting a tutor. If you're struggling with math or a different subject, you might get a tutor. And then you might also create a checklist of things you need to do to keep yourself motivated. So metacognition is important because it involves self-regulation and self-reflection of strengths, weaknesses, and the types of strategies you create. So planning for time, getting a tutor, making a checklist. Um, it is necessary foundation in culturally intelligent leadership because it underlies how you think through a problem or situation and the strategies you create to address the situation or problem. So, you get halfway through the semester, you're like, man, I'm really struggling. You might go get you a tutor. So, overall, that's all I have for you today. So, thank you for listening, and you guys have a good day.